This is your friendly neighborhood author, Jonathan, and you are listening to Season 5 of the Floor Rejects podcast, The Isle of Artemisia. Hey, welcome back to the Floor Rejects. If you're new here, the way this podcast works is every week I start out with a brief synopsis of what I've read last week. Then I read you a chapter from a story that I've been working on. And then after that, we have a brief discussion about what I could do better, what I did worse than before, what I could do to improve, and how I have improved as a writer over the past chapter. Last week, we spent a day or so in the life of Barrett Lake, lost alone at sea. All of his friends and the captain of the boat that he is on were mysteriously lost, is the best that we can kind of articulate it at this point. They were stolen, they disappeared, however you want to phrase it, they're gone. And he spent the entire chapter just kind of dealing with that fact, being alone, being confused, coping with it, drinking, eating all the food he had left, drinking most of the water he had left. And finally, he passes out. He's done. He's tired of it. After fighting off the people who had abducted his friends, he finally gives in and passes out, sleeps. And that's kind of where we leave him, is asleep on the boat, confused, disoriented, and angry. So let's get on with what chapter is this? 6 of The Isle of Artemisia. Chapter 6, Salvation. When Barrett Lake stumbles from the decrepit boat cabin in the light of dusk, he had no clue what he was looking at first. He squinted out over the edge of the boat, sure he was dehydrated or hungry and that his mind was playing tricks on him. He had spent the entire time on that boat waiting for the time he would see shore again, but what he saw wasn't what he wanted, and it sure as hell wasn't Kythera as far as he could tell. He peered harder out into the dying light, and what he made out after a few moments had him puzzled. He was staring out in the distant horizon, and he could see a singular peak jutting out of the water at an angle. It was green, likely covered in thick vegetation, but there was no land around it. The island looked to be fairly small, but he couldn't tell much about it. As the idea of land, water, and possibly people settled over him, he whooped in laughter. He was ecstatic, sure that there had to be someone on the little island. He wasn't that far from civilization. Surely there were people there, however remote it appeared. It was still the 21st century. He runs up and hops on top of the cabin. He's ready to hoist the sails and lead the boat to the island, but as he looks at the mass of fabric, he can see that it's clawed through, oily residue smeared on it. He remembers the sound of the people outside the cabin, the thumping on the door, the tearing of the fabric. God damn it, he screams at the top of his lungs. He had hit yet another dead end. He rushes down to the engine, pulling the starter cord as hard as he can, but it is to no avail. The thing sputters and dies as he expected it would. He goes to the sails, hoping that he could hoist them anyway, make his way to the island slowly. But as he tries to hoist them, he realizes they too were a lost cause. He flops onto the roof of the cabin, arms limp at his sides, and stares up at the sky in pure amazement at his predicament. He was completely beyond frustrated, lost as to what to do next. His sails were gone, the engine was gone, the compass was useless. What now? He asks himself, and as if on cue, a dolphin leaps from the sea, squeaking as if to beckon him in. For a few moments he considers it, climbing into the water and attempting a swim to shore, but he only entertains it for a moment, knowing he would never make it, and that even if he could, those things would be back, and he would have no chance. Suddenly, as if Mother Nature herself was tired of his useless wondering, a streak of lightning splits the sky. Rain begins to patter on the surface of the boat, and he laughs, opening his mouth and letting the rain splash into his tongue. He smiles as the rain falls harder and harder, soaking him to the skin while he tries to quench himself. But soon, just as he's beginning to feel like he could survive another day on the sea, another bolt of lightning lights up the desolate seascape, and he sees the outline of the island illuminated for a moment in bright white light. The boat begins to rock gently as wind sweeps across the surface of the water. Barrett opens his mouth again, drinking the water as it fell into it. Then he slides from the roof, slapping onto deck and stumbling when the boat rolls to the side. He yelps, scrambling to the cabin, blocking himself in as the rain falls harder, a summer storm forming overhead. He preemptively blocks the door as he had the night before, anticipating the arrival of the people who came at night, and prays that the storm keeps them away. Then, a few moments later, the boat bucks even harder, and Barrett knocks his head against the door. "Fuck," he screeches, reaching back to cradle the ever-growing knot on the back of his head. The storm rages above deck, the winds now howling and shaking the door against his back. He could tell the difference from it being a person on the other side, and now he had a new fear. He was alone in a strange part of the sea, without anyone knowing where he was, and the boat sounded as if it would come apart at any moment. Now water was beginning to seep into the cabin, not just from under the door, but from the seams of the roof. He groans. He couldn't imagine what would happen next, but just as he thinks the storm was losing traction, he can hear it through the din of the storm, the sound of feet on deck. In terror, he digs his heels in, and the door begins to rattle in earnest, and he can hear the ragged breathing on the other side of it. With each thump against the door, he can hear the person on the other side breathing in, a wet, sickly sound that he knew would haunt him for the rest of his days, which he was thinking may be numbered. Thump, thump, thump goes the door, over and over until Barrett screams in outright horror and anger and bangs back on it. Still screaming, he bears his full weight against the door, pounding on it with his fist swinging behind him. "No!" he shrieks through a lull in the rain. The thumping stops, as if obeying his voice. He breathes in sharply, holding his breath to listen outside the door, but he hears only the distant pattering of rain on water. He doesn't hear anything else, no one else, no more feet on deck, no more lightning. He waits a beat, then two, and slowly slides up the door, sloshing around in the trapped water. He steels himself as he takes a firm hold on the doorknob and wrenches it open after exhaling, preparing to fight for his life. But when he steps out after not seeing anyone, he is alone, no sounds except for the sound of rain and the flapping of the torn sails. He comes out onto deck and looks out, and to his amazement he can barely make out the shapes of the floating heads in the water. He can tell they're moving away in unison, in a triangle towards the island. He's excited to have been left alone for a moment until he stops to wonder why they left. He turns around, and over the roof of the cabin he sees it. A solid black wall is rolling in the direction of the boat, a wall of storm shifting and swirling, dark clouds lit up time after time by lightning that is constantly flashing from within it. He knows that he is at its mercy. The storm is undefinable in the dim light coming from the rising moon, signaling that night was truly upon him. The storm was massive, and it seemed to span the entire sky behind him, wrapping around the sides of his vision as he watched it draw closer. Panicked, he runs back into the cabin, not bothering to block the door, and hunkers down onto the mattress, waiting for the storm to hit again. After a few minutes, the rain begins to tap on the roof. Then it turns to a sound like a waterfall overhead until he can't remember what quiet sounds like. Water pours in from under the door and around the edges of the roof, and he begins to weep. He was tired, so tired and frustrated and scared, and all he had left was this boat. But now he was sure it was done. Thunder booms constantly over him, and when he looks up, he sees that the plastic roof was beginning to sag. Slowly it bowed down towards the floor in the center of the room. He did have limited knowledge of boats, but he could tell from sitting up there and climbing over the roof to access the sails that the roof was nothing more than a hard plastic shell, one that was beginning to fail. "No," he croaks, just as the seams of the roof give out and the room collapses inward. Water pours in, filling his mouth and blinding him as he slogs towards the door. He pulls at it, but the water holds it shut. He pulls harder and harder until the knob breaks off in his hand, and he curses, stumbling blindly into the pouring water, digging his hands into the plastic lining that had given in. He walks into the water, digging into the warped plastic and pulling it wider apart until he's standing under a hole in the roof, staring up above into blackness. He claws his way up the roof, up onto what was left of it in the tempest. He looks around, but no longer can he see the island. In fact, he can't see anything beyond the edges of the boat. Then he hears a horrible creak from below him, and as he looks down into the hull, he sees the floor of the cabin give way, and water rushes into the hull of the craft. He knew this was it. He was going to die. He scrambles to the deck, rushing to look out, trying to spot the island, hoping if he dove overboard he might survive. But as he rushes to the railing, the entire boat keels, rolling to the point that Barrett falls, slamming onto his chest and knocking the wind out from his lungs. For a moment he thinks he'll be swept off deck as the boat turns almost 90 degrees, the port side up in the air and the starboard side sinking into the sea for a moment before the struggling ship rights itself. He slowly gets back up, limping towards the railing of the boat, hoping that he was solid enough to hold on. But when he reaches the railing, he can see that the water line is only a foot below the deck. The boat was sinking quickly. Barrett doesn't have any idea what to do next. He was out of options. He had no flotation device. He had no flares, no radio, and no way to fix the boat. The rain whips him constantly as he struggles around the other side of it and shrinks down to the side of the cabin, out of the direct path of the wind, and waits for the end. He can see the boat sinking lower, and when the water breaks over the edge of the boat, he whimpers. Quickly, he scrambles to sit on the edge of the roof. He was scared, more terrified than he had ever been as he notices the unique sensation of his feet floating out in front of him while the water climbs the side of the cabin. The sensation gives him one last idea, and in a last-ditch effort, he pulls his feet from the water and spins around, looking down into the blackness that used to be the cabin. He slides down through the hole in the roof and into the inky water. He takes a deep breath and goes under, swimming around blindly, thrashing his hands all around him until his fingers brush what he was looking for. The mattress from Nico's bed. It was floating around in the cabin, brushing the remainder of the ceiling, and he pulls at it, tugging it towards the opening in the roof. He pulls and pulls until the mattress comes free from its place stuck under the edge. Just as the boat loses the last of its buoyancy, Barrett wraps his arms tight around the thin plastic-covered foam pad, holding onto it with all his might as the boat tries to suck him under with it. His body follows the boat, mattress and all, for a few seconds, and as his lungs burn for air, suddenly his body is shooting upwards in the warm water and he can breathe. He gasps greedily, scrambling up to straddle the mattress like a horse, now free-floating in the water and completely without reprieve from the storm. He is momentarily overjoyed as he realized he was alive without any major injuries. But then, when the wind almost topples him over into the water, he remembers exactly what was happening around him. He tightens his legs around the mattress until it's basically a pool noodle and tries to steady his breathing in the roaring gale. He attempts to peer out into the rain to try and see the island again, but he sees nothing, and so he buries his face in the part of the mattress sticking up into the air, waiting for the storm to subside. He stays that way for a long while, fighting for his life in the elements. Several times the mattress flips and he has to scramble blindly to find it. Once he was even washed off of it by a large wave and thought all was lost. Then, out of nowhere, the mattress floated next to him, startling him as it bumped against his face and he climbed back on. After rocking, flipping, and barely keeping himself afloat, the storm does finally seem to ease to a light drizzle. This was preferable, except it was now pitch black out. The moon was hidden and Barrett gave up searching. He instead gave way to keeping his face against the mattress and hoping the sun would come up impossibly quickly. The rain eventually dies, and soon enough the clouds dissipate and the moon shines down on him again. He doesn't bother looking around, all of his hope exhausted and his mind so tired that all he could do was try not to fall asleep in the open water with nothing but a waterlogged mattress. As the water stills, he experiments, letting the mattress slide up between his legs and flatten out on top of the water. When it does, he climbs up onto it, giving his burning thighs a break as he undulates gently on the rolling waves. Pieces of debris begin to materialize around him, and he can feel his eyelids begin to droop. He was so tired, inhumanly tired. He struggles to keep his eyes open, but eventually he fails, and he falls asleep in the water, barely afloat. He doesn't dream, he doesn't have the energy, but his sleep is short-lived. Just as he enters a deep slumber, actually snoring out on his little life raft, something tugs at his pant leg, which hangs over the edge of the mattress into the water. He shoots up, almost capsizing the mattress, and pulls his legs up to his chest, the mattress folding up around him like a shell. He looks around but sees nothing. He could have almost called it a nightmare, but then the mattress makes a hard dip into the water as if pulled from beneath. He yelps, holding his knees tighter to his chest as he scans the water for the source of movement. To his horror, he spots something under the surface, a pair of glowing eyes staring up at him. He's too shocked to look away, and the eyes don't either. As he looks at them, they seem to survey him. They were human, and that made them all the more frightening when they disappear for a few moments and the mattress dips again. No, 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 he shouts at the spot the eyes had been, slapping the water. He slaps it again and again in frustration until suddenly his arm is stuck up to the elbow in the water, being held down by something. Then he feels it, the sensation of fingers wrapping painfully tighter around his wrist underneath the water. The eyes appear again from underneath him now, looking up at him, blinking slowly. He tugs his arm, but he can't move it. Then a hand creeps over the edge of the mattress. He slaps at it with his free arm, but it doesn't move, and when he punches it, it latches onto his fist, pulling his other hand under. "Oh God," he whispers as the eyes blink one last time. Then a hard tug, and Barrett tumbles over the edge of the mattress, sliding under the surface of the sea with nothing but a small splash and a gasp. Okay, I'm back, and you'll have to forgive me. As soon as I started recording, not as soon as, but pretty soon into the recording, apparently we now have people who maintain the lawn, and they're outside, but hopefully you can forgive the sounds in the background. This chapter I was really excited about. I was excited about it for a couple of reasons. It's one of the few times in a story that a traditional kind of peaks and valleys story where you get to write a conflict. And I've never written a conflict before that isn't between two people. Everything I've ever written has kind of been this will they, won't they kind of love story type thing, and it's always an argument between two people about what they're going to do. Are they going to be together? Are they not going to be together? And so this was exciting for me for a couple of reasons. One, that it was a different style of writing. I'm writing about a person fighting the elements, fighting a storm, fighting the world around them. And I also was excited because I got to write something that was purely fear-based and just terrifying and bad, and there's no hope. And just when there seems to be some hope, that hope is taken away too. That sounds macabre, that sounds morbid. I didn't enjoy writing it because I love sadness. I just thought it was a fun, different thing to write, something that's not quite so, aren't you gonna love me type thing, you know? It's just a different type of story to write. And I think I did pretty okay. Pretty okay is what I'll say. I don't think it was perfect. I don't think it was the best writing I've ever done, but it was exciting, I think, listening to it. It's exciting. It's exciting to hear the battle that somebody is having with the ocean, something so vast and scary and unknown, and being pulled into it in the middle of the night and not knowing what's around you and just having to fight by feeling things around you, if that makes sense. Using senses that you don't normally have to use or rely on. And it's so alone and it's so isolating, and I love that concept. I don't love that concept, but it's kind of like a psychological, not horror, but it does kind of mess with your mind when you sit there and put yourself in the shoes of somebody who's stuck out in the middle of the ocean. They've watched all their friends one by one be kind of picked off, and now what? What do they do? What does this person do when there's nothing left and they're all by themselves and all of their options are exhausted? So I kind of like that. I like this chapter. I like the content of it, I guess I should say. Something I noticed that I did that I kind of liked and I wanted to share with you is there's this thing that I did in this chapter, or that I do sometimes, where I repeat certain words. And I think for an audio medium, a medium where I'm reading you a story, it works really well. Like at one point, I think the sentence was, "Thump, thump, thump goes the door." And then Barrett screams, "No, no, no." And the repetition of things like over and over. Or I think at one point he was pulling on something and he was under the water pulling at the mattress and it said he pulls and pulls. I think when you're reading that out loud, it does kind of give a little bit more oomph to what you're reading, or to the effort that you're trying to communicate for the character. I don't know how well that translates as far as reading it. To me, it reads just fine, and to my partner, my gay partner, it seemed to read just fine to him too, because he didn't have any issues with it. And so I like that. I do think I like that repetition. I'm not going to do it all the time, you know. And every paragraph's not going to have a repetition or a bunch of onomatopoeia or anything like that. But I do think that it's kind of interesting to do that sometimes and kind of meld the reading version of it with well, I guess they're both the reading versions of it, but like the written version of it with the audio version of it and make it work for both. And I think I'm getting better at that, at writing things that you can kind of find a voice with. Not that you can find a voice with, but that can kind of go either way. You can read it, you can listen to it be read to you, and both ways make sense and they sound good. Or they sound okay. I don't want to say they sound good. But that's something that I really also liked about this chapter. Not just the content, but that repetition, I think, adds to the ominous, useless, hyper exertion, like the effort that Barrett is putting into surviving, the over and over repetition. He's trying, and everywhere he turns is another obstacle. And here's something else that I love. He gets through the storm. He figures out a way to survive again, to go from a giant boat or a bigger boat to floating on a mattress, and then he's pulled off the mattress. What the fuck? It's such a cliffhanger. Like, it's weird to say cliffhanger because you can just turn the page and there's the next chapter. But when you're reading something and you get really engrossed into what you're reading and you're just going sentence by sentence, line by line, and you get to that end, even though you know there's a next chapter, it's still kind of like a cliffhanger. It's like the end of an episode. And I love that. I love that concept of having a cliffhanger within a book. Not at the end of a book. I like the end of a book to have a resolution, usually, unless you're planning on a sequel or something. But I love the idea of cliffhangers within the story, of those peaks and valleys. You know, your rising action, and then there's the storm. You know, we spent kind of the first chapter learning about the characters and then slowly rising to this storm. And now we're going to have some falling action and then a low point. And then we're going to have some climbing action and a high point. And I love that. I really do kind of like that. I find it fun and funky and fresh. I do. I'll be honest with you. There are some things that I can do better. I think we're about done with the sleeping thing. I kind of, at first, was giving it to Barrett because I know when I get really anxious or I get really upset or depressed or I'm out of my element, I turn to sleep. I will put myself away, kind of, and just go to sleep if I'm feeling really anxious or depressed, like he's feeling being out on this boat. He's dealing with his breakup. He's dealing with anxiety. He's dealing with feeling alone. And so I got that for him, and I understood it, and I think it's relatable. But now he doesn't really have an excuse to sleep. He's in survival mode to the fullest. He doesn't have a boat. Obviously, this is not the end of the story. He's not dead, but he's been pulled under the water. You know, we kind of have to move away from depressed, anxiety-ridden Barrett to survival mode Barrett, or to confused Barrett, or to whatever is next for him Barrett. But it's got to be a different side of him. So no more of this, each chapter ends with him falling asleep, each chapter ends with him waking up the next morning, something like that. It worked because every night is when somebody would disappear, and so because they were disappearing on a nightly basis, it felt like a good place to end the chapter. But I don't want to continue that pattern of only covering day by day. I want to be able to cover a week in one chapter, or a month in one chapter, or an hour in one chapter, and it not matter quite so much how long the period of time is. It's more the content and how much is happening within that time period. Do you know what I mean? So that's something that I may not have done well or badly, but that I want to change going forward, or that is just a change of pace going forward. What is this on the back of my neck? Oh, it's just a shadow. Whew. Thought it was something else. Let's see, is there anything else that I particularly liked? I think that imagery in this chapter was okay, was pretty good. things like him climbing up on the mattress and straddling it like a horse, or turning the mattress into a pool noodle, or the imagery of the roof sagging and coming down in this like bulb coming down and splitting open, or the image of the sky and the storm being this wall. I think I did a pretty okay job describing it, and kind of giving the idea of what he's truly up against, I think. I don't know. You'll have to let me know. But I think that was a pretty good point in this chapter, was the images and the scene and the setting that he's kind of dealing with. Maybe I just really like this chapter. Maybe so. I don't know. I really do like this chapter. I think it's a good one. But I'm not going to hold you up forever. You don't want to hear my endless rambling about what I do and don't like, so let me close this. And let's just chat for a minute. As always, I would love it if you would go on your podcast app of choice and give my podcast a rating, a 5-star rating. Anything below, keep it to yourself. Because I have like 3 ratings on the iTunes store, and 2 of them are 5-star ratings, and then 1 is a 4-star rating, and it drug my average down. But it was funny because the rating was like, I'm enjoying the story so far, but I don't understand why somebody would sacrifice their entire freedom for $500,000 a year. And this was for the Wells House phenomenon. If you're not familiar, that was last season's story, and the premise was that the main character's family member dies. He has to go and take care of this mansion, and basically he has to live there full time, and he can't really go anywhere. But in exchange, he gets $500,000 a year just to maintain the property and do whatever he wants with. I found that funny because I think, to me, and I think a lot of people, maybe not everybody, but to me at least, it felt very relatable that like I would give up so much to have financial security like that. And not that it would have to be $500,000, but just enough money that I never had to worry. I would give up vacationing for long periods of time for that. I would give up leaving the house for long periods of time for that. Maybe that's just the anxiety in me or the homebody in me, but it made so much sense. So if you don't mind just going to iTunes and giving me a 5-star rating, I would greatly appreciate that. If you're watching on YouTube, hit subscribe. Never hurts to subscribe. You'll just get a weekly video from me and maybe bonus videos here or there. I do DIY stuff. I do drawing stuff. So, hit subscribe. Subscribe wherever you're at, whatever you're listening to it, however you're doing it. Hit subscribe. Doesn't hurt. Only helps, really. More free content, because I don't think it costs you anything. I hope not. Am I charging you? No. There's not even there's ads on the YouTube videos because I don't think I can turn those off, but there's not ads on the podcast version. At least there shouldn't be, because I don't put any ads on there. So there shouldn't be any ads unless your podcasting platform automatically puts them on there. I cannot control that. What else is there to discuss? My Etsy store is still down. It should be back up soon, but some unforeseen things are going on in my real life, and I have to take down the naked drawings of men with my name attached to them for now. Sorry. It's the world we live in. It is what it is. Hey, let me take this microphone off and talk to you. Hey, if you wouldn't mind just going to twitter.com, have you heard of it? And just giving me a little follow there, that would be really cool, because I've only got 3 followers on Twitter. My Twitter is @FloorRejects, FLOORREJECTS, just like it sounds, Floor Rejects. And I would greatly appreciate it. I would love if you went over and followed and tweet me. Let me know something good. I want to know good things. Let me know what you liked or what you didn't like or whatever. Just let me know. And then at the same time, if you want to let me know something privately, something that you liked or that you don't like, or a suggestion or whatever you want to tell me, you can email me, floorrejects, FLOORREJECTS @gmail.com. You can email me there. Let me know privately. I would greatly appreciate that too. I'd love it. But besides that, that's all I've got for you this week. I appreciate you as always listening. And this has been another chapter from your friendly neighborhood author, Jonathan, of The Isle of Artemisia. Now, I gotta go because my neighbors are screaming. Okay, bye.